So, you pull a character you really want to play, but you have no idea how to build a team, and searching for teams shows you options with characters you don't have. If that's the case, then this video is for you. I will explain the basics of team building in Genshin, so you can start doing big numbers. Also, if you're new, you can check out the rest of the series for even more info about how the game works. Well then, what makes a team good, at least theoretically, so it can fully clear the abyss even with somewhat weak builds? It should check these boxes. At least one DPS character, a support that synergizes with the main DPS, so it can form a core with the character, forming a second core with the third character. In case you don't know what cores are, they are basically just 2 or 3 units who synergize really well with each other, something like Bennett and Xiangling for example. A second core would be adding Xing Cho to Bennett and Xiangling core and basically making a national team with the fourth character. And finally, using good characters is a must. I don't mean to say using a weak character makes the whole team bad, it's just that using a Yanfei instead of an Arlecchino means your characters must have better builds overall. Also, in some teams, the fourth character can be a flex, which means you can switch it for either more damage or a defensive option. Anyway, the team gets a bonus if they have a battery, since it makes the team less reliant on ER rolls. They have a grouper, because the grouper will let your team do more damage in AoE. Sustain character, since it makes playing certain chambers less annoying. Also, if the team has a weird setup or rotation, it gets a minus. Now, teams can be categorized into reaction-based teams, like Hyperbloom, Nilobloom, Porygon-oriented teams, where the majority of your damage comes from these reactions, or talent-based teams, where your damage comes from your characters themselves. This doesn't mean that talent-based teams ignore reactions, or reaction-based teams ignore talent damage. It's just that they focus on buffing the respective way of doing damage before buffing the other one. Anyway, we can group talent-based teams into 2 categories. Teams that care about reactions a lot, something like melt teams, vape teams, freeze teams, basically any team that is centered around the reaction. The difference between this type of team and reaction-based teams is that the damage still comes from your talents, it's just that the reactions amplify your damage or make them easier to play. And teams where you don't really care about reactions, like mono teams, taser teams, chevreuse teams, etc., where the reactions are just a byproduct of how you made your team, like triggering overload for chevreuse's passive or using Kazuha in a mono team to get the VV shred. The reactions themselves do some damage, but not enough to make it the centerpiece of the team. Anyway, reaction-based teams, even though the main source of damage is transformative reactions, the other 20 to 40% of your damage still comes from talents. Usually building a team around the transformative reactions is enough damage, but min-maxing the team means trying to get a good build for your Xing Cho and your Nahida. Of course, there are also talent-based teams who use transformative reactions, but usually most of your damage doesn't come from that. Take something like Alhaitham Quickplum. You're using Alhaitham with an Electro. Since you want to use Furina as well, this Electro should be a healer. Since Furina will trigger Blooms, Cookie's AoE will proc Hyperbloom. And then your flex slot can be something like Nahida for even more damage. In this team, Hyperbloom kinda acts like a third DPS, giving you some bonus damage for free. Anyway, let's backtrack a little. We got the DPS character in mind, but what do the supports do? What buffs do I need to get? Well, if you're doing just a Hyperbloom team, we're looking for as much EM as possible and then Threshold. So a character like Nahida and such like Instructor, Gilded Dreams, and most importantly Deepwood Memories will be what we'll try to use. Of course, you might not have Nahida, so who do we use instead? Need a healer? Yayao. Need more Dendro? Dendro MC, Collei, etc. The main goal of a team like this is to trigger as many reactions as fast as possible. But on top of those buffs, we might try to get some other buffs for the characters that are doing talent damage. Talent-based teams have more options since they also need more stuff. There are a lot of buffs, so let me group them. Attack buffs, so Bennett Q, Noblesse, Pyro Resonance, etc. Damage percent buffs, so characters like Furina, Yelan, Kazuha, and artifacts like Cinder City and Petra. EM buffs, characters like Sucrose, Nahida, the Instructor set, depends on the team though. Shred buffs, so things like VV Shred, Chevreuse's passive, Chillen's E, etc. There are also some buffs to get more crit, but they're not really important. Let's take Arle, since she's a really versatile character and I can explore all Pyro team comps. What can you use with her? Since she's Pyro, we can try to fit in Hydro or Cryo characters to buff her damage with reactions, or we can completely ignore reactions and go for either Mono Pyro or Chevreuse comps. Some attack buffs will make her deal even more damage. Shred is also really important, so we'll 100% try to fit that in. Be it VV, Shilolan or Chevreuse. And if we can find any damage percent buffs, those are also appreciated. Okay, so these are the ideas. Let's try to form a team with them. First on the list, reactions. Most common pyro comps are vape teams. Most pyro characters can fit someone like Cinctuary Lan to enable vape consistently. If you don't have Cinctuary Lan, maybe you can try to form a melt team instead. Characters like Kaya and Rosaria used to be the only useful characters for such a team, but now with Citlali, these types of teams are doing insane numbers. Though with Arle, unless you have Citlali, you can ditch the idea. Anyway, if we can't go for reactions, we can just go for either a Chevreuse comp or a Mono Pyro comp. Both archetypes are good nonetheless. So what about attack buffs? When we mention attack buffs, we mostly think about Bennett. So if he is free, we'll use him. If he isn't, Chevreuse is really the only other decent attack buff character, but she can't be played in teams other than just Pyro and Electro. Lynette can also work in something like a vape team, but I wouldn't recommend her in any other comp as an attack buffer. She can work fine as the VV enabler, but there are better options. Since we don't have any other good attack buffs from characters, we can try to use Thrilling Tales on Catalyst users. Those Catalyst users are usually the Anemo character as well, so if you want more EM, you can use Sucrose, or if you want a shield, you can use Lanyan. If you don't have those two, and you have Kazuha, of course, use him. You will buff damage percent instead. She's kinda weird to use in melt teams though. The other notable shred character is Shirolan. She basically does the same thing as Kazuha, but instead of grouping, it's a longer duration, so it's easier to use in melt comps. Of course, Chevreuse teams already get the shred from Chevreuse's passive on every overload triggered. Let me highlight some teams that you should keep in mind while making a team. Elemental application plays a big role in making a character good in a certain archetype. Having too much of one element or too little can affect the team negatively. For example, a slow Hydro character like Furina won't be able to keep up with someone like Hu Tao, thus making her teams without any other Hydro deal way less damage. On the contrary, in teams where Hydro would normally mess up the reactions, so something like Quicken, with Furina, instead of forming a Hyper Bloom team like you usually do with a fast Hydro character, it will enable Quicken for longer durations, giving you more damage for Quicken, while also letting you trigger some Hyper Blooms. These types of teams are usually called Quick Bloom teams. Anyways, back on topic. Another issue you could encounter is if you can't apply an element before the start of the rotation to shred with VV. It makes it harder to fit in Anemo characters, thus limiting your options. Anyway, let me give you a quick rundown on what reactions certain elements want or can work with in anything that you're trying to make. Let's start with transformative reactions. In reaction-based teams, they are the biggest source of damage. Buffing EM and shredding the enemy's defense are the only important things. Elements like Electro and to a lesser extent Pyro play that way. In talent-based teams, they can act as a sub-DPS if you're talking about reactions like Hyper Bloom, Bulgeon and Swirl, or some other reactions can help with other things. For example, Freeze can be used either to keep enemies grouped or to replace the sustain character, whilst for contact can be used as a way to buff physical teams. Anyway, after transformative reactions, we have multiplicative reactions. There's only two reactions, melt and vape, but because of how important the order of applying elements is in a team, I prefer to classify them as reverse forward melt and reverse and forward vape. Reverse vape is by far the easiest to build around. There are a lot of good off-field Hydro characters and good on-field Pyro characters. You can rarely find any issues with elemental application here. Next on the list is reverse melt. Trickier since there are less good on-field Cryo characters than Pyro, and the same for Pyro characters than Hydro, but the reaction is still easy to maintain because of how elemental aura works. Now, forward melt and forward vape teams will usually encounter one issue: timing of the element application. It can also happen in reverse teams, but usually that is fixed after 1 or 2 seconds, because the elemental aura you want on the enemy clears the one you want to react. In this case, the element you want to react also clears the aura that you want on the enemy. So if somehow you get the element you want to react as an aura, for the rest of the rotation you will not be able to trigger the reaction you want. Because of this, the off-fielders that can work sometimes aren't perfect. Don't get me wrong, both forward vape and forward melt teams are really good, and the teams usually feel good to play as well. It's just that it's harder to find teammates for the on-field DPS. Take Moalani's teammates as an example. Apart from Mavuika, we have Toma, who can't enable the reaction in AoE. Xiangling, but she needs like 300 ER to burst every rotation. Xinyan, but if her shield breaks, you no longer get any pyro up. You get what I mean, right? Most of her teammates have issues. They can also work in certain scenarios, and I personally use Moalani with Xiangling, but unless you can fix the issue, it's not worth the hassle. For Formelt, Citlali almost fully carries this reaction, and she's also irreplaceable in most teams. Sure, Kaya and Rosaria might work, but some characters have too much pyro for just one of them to keep up. Again, if you can make a team without elemental application issues, it is usually worth it. The other reaction type talent-based teams care about are additive reactions. Those reactions, of course, being quicken and aggravate. They fundamentally work the same, they don't need that much EM, and they have no issues with elemental application. They're basically a free buff for characters that can hit a lot. There's also differences in the same comps because of the main DPS. Let me give you a more concrete example with Arlecchino, Hu Tao and Gaming. Gaming and Arlecchino are pretty similar. They have slow application and both of them can either go vape, melt or digit reactions. Now, there is a difference between how they play apart from Arle's normal attack spam and Gaming's plunges. Gaming can't really set up his own element to swirl, while Arle can switch in and out of combat without any issues. Arlecchino is too squishy to use for Rina, but Gaming loves to use her. Now, Hu Tao is different from both of them. She wants more Hydro than both of them. Hu Tao also can't use Melt since no characters can keep up. She also can't ditch reactions because she's balanced around them. Three characters from the same element and same role all have slightly or completely different teams from one another. This can also happen with other characters. Take Eula, even though she's cryo, she's a physical DPS. Or Ayato, who is mostly used as a driver for Hyperbloom teams or Burgeon teams, instead of an actual Hydra DPS like Child and Nivelletar. If the character is Electro or Dendro, you usually play them in Quicken teams, or you might try to fit in some Hyperblooms. There are of course characters who don't follow this rule, like Kinich and Emily, who prefer Burning, and Raiden, who prefers something like Rational instead of being built around Dendro reactions. Anemo DPS characters are all built like hyper carries, the more buffs the better, but Chaska doesn't really care about her own element, since her damage comes from her team's elements. Geo DPS characters either go mono Geo like Ito and Noel, or they try to fit a 2-character core of another element into their teams, like Navia does. Anyway, the general rules for building a team are: choose if you're gonna play around the reaction. If yes, try to enable that reaction as many times as you need, such as using a driver for the reaction. Search for a second DPS that synergizes well with the main DPS, and then search for any possible buffs the team can use. And lastly, see if you can fit in characters that can make your life easier, like a shield for interruption resistance or battery to help you get your bursts faster. Also, in case you're trying to build a team for a character that is not the main DPS, you can try to find a DPS that works well with your desired character and go from there. You can also search up the best teams for the characters and try to understand why they work. Also, there are some teams without a dedicated on-fielder, but you might be like, bro, but how will I build a team without a dedicated on-field DPS? The answer is simply more off-field DPS characters. You know how there are some characters with weirdly short skill cooldowns, like Bennett, Kaya, Rosaria, etc? Well, what if you build all of them around their damage? Don't spend that much time on them, since they aren't useful on field after they use their skills and burst. So what happens if you just switch between them and try to spam their abilities off cooldown? Teams that work like this are called Quickswap Teams. They might feel weird to play, but it might be worth to try them out. For example, Rosaria Reverse Melt is a Quickswap team composed of only 4-star characters, and apart from Shangling, all 3 other characters try to use as many skills as possible. You might not need to know that much about this type of team, but just knowing about this mechanic can give you way more teams to play if you're ever interested in trying out more characters. Anyway, this has been the team building guide. If you learned something new or just enjoyed the video, you can subscribe for more content like this. But yeah, this has been it, and I'll see you next time.